Hello, how are you? My name is Sheila Gilheany. I'm with Alcohol Action Ireland. I just want to welcome you so warmly here tonight to this lovely theatre, this really, really nice space. Before I get going with what we're doing, I just have to do a little bit of housekeeping. The fire exits, the door that we came in there this evening, and there's also another one behind us, okay? So I'll get going with what we're about this week. Alcohol Action Ireland was formed actually nearly 20 years ago, and we've worked for a long time on issues about how to try and reduce harm from alcohol. And sometimes we've done that through pushing for legislative change. Sometimes it's been about pushing for services. Sometimes it's, trying to look at the whole picture around alcohol. But back in 2019, 3 individuals came together and talked to us about trying to do something very special. And they started up an initiative that we call Silent Voices. And I'm actually very pleased that our three co-founders are actually here with us this evening. Barbara, Whelan, and Carol Fawsitt. And another one will be joining us on stage shortly, Marion Rackard. And what these 3 individuals wanted to do was to start to really raise awareness about a very hidden aspect of alcohol harm. And what they wanted to draw attention to was the needs of children, and indeed the adult children who what people go into, who have grown up with the problem of drinking in the home, who have lived with what we would say the trauma of parental problem alcohol use. And we know that there's something like about 200,000 children right now living through the chaos of that, and we know especially over the last couple of years with a big increase in home drinking through the pandemic, that those conditions and the situations have become very acute for a lot of those children. But of course, children don't stay children, they grow up, and we know there's something like about 400,000 adults, conservatively, we would estimate, living with that legacy of what they grew up with. And it's a complex issue. It affects people in all sorts of different ways. There are people who, do have problems, and they do carry, I suppose, a weight of that childhood experiences there, and that weight can manifest itself in different ways. It may be through, could be illness, could be physical illness, could be problems with depression, anxiety, it could be a difficulty with relationships. But there are people for whom none of that seems to be the case, and yet still carry that weight, and still carry that feeling of all is not well with the world, all is not right in the way that I am experiencing the world. And what we have tried to do through Silent Voices is to, I suppose, give voice, to let people hear those voices of what has been a very hidden aspect of harm from alcohol. This week, we've been doing a thing where we call it End the Silence, and what we're really trying to do is to put a spotlight on that. So we have 3 events this week. We had our first one yesterday, which I was incredibly uplifted from. Well, actually, in one way, it was incredible because we had people speaking about their own experience, but we also had, which was harrowing, I will say that was harrowing, but we also had people talking about programs and things that were of help, and I found that just really helpful, and it gave me a kind of confidence that yes, there's things can be done. So that got us off to a great start on that. We also had some research that we published, which I found very interesting. Colleagues that we did in UCC did a survey with mental health professionals and asked them, have you ever had any training in this whole area? And given that there is, a significant impact, on people's mental health from having experienced this particular trauma, we were somewhat shocked to find that 70% of mental health professionals had no training whatsoever. And in fact, the vast majority wouldn't necessarily ask about this as being an issue if somebody came into them. So that sets all these alarm bells off, why we need to be doing this kind of thing. So having, as I said, had a number of events and looked at some research, we actually thought it's very good to hear the voices in person of people who have experienced this particular problem. And one of the things we've done over the last few years is to gather some of those voices. We do it on our website, we call it Shared Voices, and people share their stories. And what I'd like to do actually, as we get going this evening, is to play a wee short video which just captures some of those voices and gives you a sense of what's actually happening, what people are saying. And I'll come back to them afterwards, and we'll get going with the rest of the evening at that stage. But I'm tempted to say roll there, Colette. But I'm biting it back. I'm just saying, we play the wee video and we'll chat a wee bit more. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila. Thank you very much. All right, good evening. I think it'd be helpful just to establish who we're talking to. Like, who are ye? Why are you here? And I'm not going to interview everybody here, but I'd like to get an idea of people who have a lived experience of growing up in a family where alcohol was abused. Is that anybody? Okay. Anybody who works in mental health or... How are you? Good evening. Oh, good for you, right, okay. Anybody who has any power to change policies here? All right, good, right. Good to see you. And welcome to the rest of you. So the reason I'm here is a bit odd because I think it might have been research done by Alcohol Action Ireland or somebody else, and it appeared in the paper, and I was on one afternoon and commenting on something I'd read, and it was about the effect of alcohol abuse on children. And I just mentioned my own experience. My dad was a heavy drinker, and I said that my abiding memory of our house was a tense house. He wasn't abusive, but he introduced tension into a very small house with 9 children. And it was that thing of listening for the door to open and hoping that he was in a good form and there wasn't going to be a row, and hoping that you get to bed before he'd come home, and hoping that maybe he wouldn't go out at all so he wouldn't be drunk, and all those things. And as a teenager, I took on a sort of the burden of responsibility, because although I was the third eldest in the family, my older brother was sort of, I don't know what it is, I think it's sometimes with firstborns or whatever, he didn't really care that much. I was saying, look at this is messing up the house, and he was going, sure, go on, relax, fine, don't worry about it. It's not your problem to worry about. So I took on this responsibility, and I remember trying to figure out constantly whether my dad was a heavy drinker or an alcoholic. And I did psychology in Trinity, and I remember going to all the books and trying to figure this out, and there was loads of different theories at the time of, was it a disease, was it not a disease? Now I realise, and I think most people are coming to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter. If it's abuse, it's abuse. There are degrees of it, but if it's having a negative effect in a real way on a family, well then it's a problem. So anyway, I was mentioning this anyway, and then I got a phone call from Sheila months ago. She said, I heard you talking about the fact that your dad was a heavy drinker. Would you come along, and we're doing this thing in October, and would you MC it? And I said, fine. And I suppose that's what we're here for tonight. And we're sort of preaching to the converted in a way, aren't we? You know, all of you want to be here because you either have the experience or you want to learn more about it. So I suppose our job is to listen to what people have to say and take away and share those stories and try and get people talking about this and talking about the negative effect that alcohol abuse can have on children. And of course, the problem is that we know that then it creates a cycle, doesn't it? You know, because if you are in a dysfunctional family, there's trauma involved, likelihood is that you may be addicted, then then you have children, and then so I suppose part of what they want to do in Alcohol Action Ireland is to break that cycle, which is a big job. So the people you're about to meet, most of them have had what they call now lived experience. They're now adults, and they will talk about it. And we'll talk to them initially about their childhoods. We'll talk to them about how it's affecting them being into adulthood, and then we might get their opinions on how they think we as a society can change to make things better for people in the future. When we spoke to all 4 people, you can then chip in and ask a question, and Jennifer will be going among you just to pick you out and make you stand up and make sure your diction's okay and all that sort of thing. Okay, so let's meet. So I'll introduce all 4, and then we'll take one at a time, and that's the way it'll work. Everyone understand what's going on? Any questions before we start? No? Okay. Okay, so I'll put on my glasses and tell you that. So our first guest this evening is Christine Dwyer Hickey. Christine, come in, Christine. Yeah, it's good. There you go. And there. Both Christine's parents abused alcohol. She wrote a book called Tatty in 2004. Which was a memoir dressed up as a work of fiction. And she'll be reading an excerpt from that, and we'll be talking to her about her childhood in a moment. Next up, we have Marion Rackard. Give Marion a round of applause. Hi, Marion. Maybe sit here, yeah, just to break it up a little bit. So Marion's a psychotherapist, addiction counsellor, co-founder of Alcohol Action Ireland, and of the reason we're here tonight, Silent Voices, along with Carol and Barbara, who are in the audience. And all of this, I suppose her life's work because she lived with an alcoholic father who happened to be quite famous. So we'll be talking to Marion about that. You're very welcome, Marion. Thanks for coming along. And Stephen Lynch, ladies and gentlemen. Give Stephen a round of applause. There's Stephen, yeah. Stephen is just back from Sierra Leone, world traveller. Thanks so much, Stephen, for being with us this evening. He's the public affairs manager with Channel 4, brought up in London with Irish parents, and his dad was an alcoholic. He's an ambassador for NACOA, which is the National Association for Children of Alcoholic Parents. That's why Stephen's here, and he has a story to tell, and obviously he can share with us things and how they're done in the UK. You're very welcome, Stephen. Thank you very much. And finally, would you please welcome Senator Francis Black, ladies and gentlemen. And Frances is a senator, obviously a singer, and after her own recovery, Frances worked as an addiction counsellor, and then she, through her work with alcoholics, she saw that there was a gap in the market, if you like, support for the families. And with that in mind, in 2009, she set up the RISE Foundation to help families affected by alcoholism. You're very welcome, Frances. Okay, all that's factually correct. You're all happy and comfortable. Okay, right. Okay. So it's a relaxed evening. I'd prefer if the house lights were on, really, because we're not doing a play. Would you prefer if the house lights were on? Yeah. Kathy, could we get the house lights on, if that's okay? Just because, that's great. So we can see the whites of their eyes, ish. Okay, right. So. We start with Christine then. How are you, Christine?
I'm grand, thanks.
Good. So I said there that the book which you're holding in your hand, Tatty, was a memoir dressed up as a work of fiction. 2004.
Yes.
So it was very autobiographical, although at the time you didn't say that.
No, I denied it to the death. I said,
right.
No, it wasn't. It was based on parts of my life, but at the time my mother was still alive, so what happened was my father died in 1995, and I was having trouble sort of getting over his death. And I'd already written 3 novels at this stage, but I had no intention of writing this. But I ended up going to a counsellor, a kind of grieving, to help you with grieving. And after a couple of sessions, she said, well, you're a writer, why don't you do this? Write what happened or what you think happened from a child's point of view, and that way maybe you'll understand that it isn't your fault. You were a child, it wasn't your fault. So anyway, I did that, and after writing a few pages, the sort of the cold-hearted writer came in and said, "Geez, this is not bad." So anyway, I decided to go with it and kind of look on it as a work in literature and concentrating on the voice of the child and how the voice changes because she's a year older at each chapter, and forget about all the stuff that was in it. And I'd finish a day's work and I'd maybe get into the car and say, that was quite a good day's work now, I'm pleased with that. And then I'd think, shit, it was true, and I'd get upset. But anyway, that was then, and it had a huge reaction when it came out, and an awful lot of people started to write to me and to send me letters and confess. People I'd known for years would suddenly say, well, I never liked to say it before, but...
Right, so you've touched on something there just before you read, because you were insistent that it wasn't autobiographical, because there was a carry-on, a bit of a shame there, was there? Was that it?
It wasn't because of shame, because I was afraid of my mother, to be honest.
Right.
Now, before my father died, he used to say to me, you should write that story.
Okay.
And I'd say to him, no, you mightn't come out so good in it, you're so well yourself. Like, my parents were separated and they couldn't be in the same county, never mind the same building. And, but he said, I don't care once it's a well-written book.
And was he sober at that stage?
No, my father never became sober.
Never became sober.
He was of that generation that thought if you didn't fall down flat on your face and you were able to provide for your family, you weren't an alcoholic. That was only Egypts who couldn't hold a drink.
Right.
That was that sort of way.
Yeah.
And so he never actually gave up drink. He only started to lose tolerance for drink as he got a bit older, even though he was a huge drinker.
Right. Okay. So what age is Tatty in this excerpt?
Tatty is 5.
In this excerpt.
One.
And it's
kind of
it's the pub, the Irish pub, is it?
It's kind of the idea of the normalisation of the pub environment for a child, and also to see the young enabler starting to develop, how they cover up, and the different coping mechanisms, as they say, that we take. So anyway, when you go out with the men, you go to the pub. You get hooshed up on the bar stool. You get to do things you're not supposed to tell Mam about. Sometimes you get a little pint of stout. A pint for me, Dad says, and a little pint for my pal here. It tastes like black buttermilk, sour and thick. It stings the tubes in the inside of your ears on the way down. But you drink it all up and go, the way Dad does, and wipe your mouth on the back of your hand. Then you say, I want to go to the toilet, even if you don't, and you get lifted down off the stool and the men forget all about you. You can turn on all the taps. You can make the toilets have a race, running in and out, flushing all the chains. You can open all the doors and slap them shut again. You can come back outside and crawl all over the long bouncy seats by the wall. In some of the pubs you can find out where the pubman's wife is, and it's always in the kitchen. Sometimes the kitchen is up the dark stairs, the whole house up there with a living room and a dining room and all. One of them even has a piano on the landing. But sometimes it's down the cold yard past the jerky red chickens, or else it might be just in the back through the bar. She likes when you have to go through the bar. You can look at all the bottles squeezed into their shelves, orange, black, raspberry, lemon, and the queues of glasses and mustard jars and the big cardboard box with the shuffly crisp bags inside. There's the bin where the barman throws all the cigarette ends, and the squashed up napkins and the fat from the ham. There's his mixed up footprints all over the sawdust, silver bottle tops, blobs of spilled stout. There's the low down sink where he washes his glasses, and the high up box where he keeps all the bets. You can see all these things when you walk through the bar, and when you get to the end you turn around to make sure you're going the right way. Then the barman says, go on, don't be shy, go on through, she won't mind. And the next thing, you're in the kitchen. Then the pubman's wife might ask, did you have your dinner? And you always say no. Because you get funny dinners in other people's kitchens, dinners that don't taste the same as Mam's. It might be the same stuff, but they match it a different way on the plate, and that's why it just doesn't taste the same. She got the heel of a roast heart stuffed in the middle, and another time a dippy egg and turnips cut up like chips. She got 5 Kimberley biscuits and tea in a mug after one dinner, and that was a bit greedy, like eating 2 meals at one go, because Mam only gives you 2 biscuits and only at tea time. Once she got white pudding and mashed potatoes and stuff out of a tin that looked like sick but was called Russian salad, and that was the funniest dinner of all. The woman who makes you your dinner might ask you your business. And even though Mam always warns her, don't be telling those nosy owl ones all your business. Sometimes she gets mixed up and forgets. And it's hard to know what you're allowed to tell or not, because 1 minute it's tell the truth and shame the devil. The next minute it's, what did you have to go and tell them that for? I could kill you stone dead. Mam says when someone asks your business, all you have to say is, I don't know. But the questions about your business are nearly always the same. Like, do you have a telly and how many bedrooms and brothers and sisters? And that would be too stupid not to know if you had a telly or not, or how many bedrooms or brothers and sisters. The woman with the Kimberley biscuits asked her different questions. The woman with the Kimberley biscuits asked, how is your mammy? And is she still a real glam puss? What's a glam puss? Does she still wear beautiful clothes? I don't know. Well, is she still lovely and slim then? Oh no, her tummy's still a good bit fat after getting baby Luke. Another one! My God, he didn't give her much of a break, did he? The woman with the Kimberley biscuits had a telly in her kitchen, and a man and a woman were having a row on the telly. The Kimberley woman said she knew Dad from before and he was a real heartbreaker, and no one could believe it when he finally got married to a young one like Mam. Then she started looking at the telly. The woman on the telly was wearing a frilly pinny. She had her hand on her hip and kept shaking her finger at the man every time she gave out to him. And people you couldn't see kept on laughing all over the place. Does your mammy ever give out to your daddy? The Kimberley woman asked her. I don't know, she said. Like if he came home drunk, would she give out stink to him? Don't know. Oh, isn't she great? Your mammy must be very easygoing then, is she? So your mammy and daddy never fight then, is that what you're telling me? Do you mean like a boxing match? No, like a row, like that pair on the telly. I don't know. I mightn't hear them if I was asleep, but I'd hear all the people laughing. And no, the Kimberley woman said, there wouldn't be anyone laughing. That's not real, that's just the telly. Oh, well, I don't know because I mightn't hear them anyway. I mightn't hear them if they were shouting and calling each other names. I might know if Mam was screaming and Dad was slamming doors, and then if Mam was crying in the living room on her own. Well, I might know that. Is that right now? The Kimberley woman said. It made her feel kind of itchy, the Kimberley woman asking her about Mam and Dad. It made her feel kind of ashamed and afraid as well in case she might have said something by mistake and maybe now she'd get in big trouble with Mam. So the next time Pugman's wife asked her business, she didn't say, I don't know. She told fibs instead. She said they had 3 tellies and 10 bedrooms and that Mam wore a wedding dress and a big hat when she was washing the dishes and sweeping the floor. And that made the woman laugh all over the place and call her a hard nut. Oh, you're a real hard nut, the woman said, and started laughing again. It was nice being able to make the woman laugh. It was nice, and it was much easier than telling the truth.
There you go. I know why you picked that, because that's one of your memories of your childhood, that you told lies about.
Told, and fierce liar, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my early childhood, if anybody asked me anything, I went into a panic and I thought I was going to let something slip. So I would make up some fabulous story that I made, that was completely...
I suppose we want to know the truth though here.
Yeah, but I did get past that.
Yeah, so...
And the funny thing is then, this is when I was in a national school, the local national school, where everybody kind of knew where you lived and about you and all the rest of it. And then when I was 10, I was sent away to boarding school. And overnight, I completely changed. Overnight, I just stopped having, because nobody knew. Everybody was the same in the school. You had the same cubicle, the same little space you lived, the same desk. Everything was the same. And nobody knew anything about you, and nobody knew what your house was like. And I just changed completely as my personality changed, and as a child I changed, and even as a pupil, because in the big school I was in, I was very poor in school. I mean, the teacher would have thought maybe even that there was something wrong with me. I was very slow in school. But when I went to that school, suddenly I was getting gold stars, and suddenly it just changed completely.
Okay. So talk to me then about because you sort of alluded to it there with your mother crying in the sitting room on her own. What are the bad memories? Were there rows? Was there tension? Was there stress? Was there fear?
I always think myself that it's like another presence in the house. It's kind of like, do you remember when they did the interview with Princess Diana years ago about there was a third person in the marriage. Well, it's like this presence there's another person, another adult of some sort within the family. You can't see them, but you know they're there. So the tension is there. And my parents had a very volatile relationship, and the drink was kind of glamorous in a lot of ways. They weren't home drinkers. My mother was a home drinker later. She used to have Hyde drink and she'd drink later. But at the time, they would drink in the Bailey and MacDaid's, and they mixed with all these heavy, heavy drinkers. I mean, there was oceans of drink consumed at that time in Dublin. That's the way it was. And an awful lot of casualties. And my parents got caught up in it, and I think they had the extra pressure as well of having their eldest son special needs, which I think they found very difficult. And they were under a lot of pressure to put him away, but they kept him. And is
that part of the reason they drank, do you think?
I think with my father it might have accelerated it. Now look,
you don't know. Yeah.
I don't know, because they were victims of victims. But my father's father was an alcoholic, a different type of, because we always forget that there's all different types, a different type of alcoholic. He was a cranky little man who didn't like anything and was angry and quite violent with his children. But my father wasn't like that. We were never afraid of my father.
Right.
We were never afraid of him. We were afraid of my mother, but we were never afraid of my father. But my mother was a very unhappy sort.
And she left the family home.
She left the family home. Yeah, my parents split up. She left. She left before they split up.
And you then were the eldest daughter.
I was the only daughter.
Right.
The only daughter. So I stepped.
You became the caregiver.
Stepped into that. Yeah. It's one of the several roles I've had.
What age were you? What age were you?
Well, I started being the carer really when I was about 12, I think.
Right.
My mother tried to kill herself when she was 12. She took an overdose.
When you were 12?
When I was 12,
yeah,
sorry.
Right.
When I was 12.
Yeah.
She took an overdose. And, I would be taken out of school to look after the kids, the other kids, And that went on for a long time, and it always went on. And then, that's just the way it was with them. She was an extremely unhappy woman, and an unhappy drinker.
Did you see what other families were like, maybe, and envy?
Yes, I used to sometimes make friends with people because I liked their parents better than like them.
Yeah.
I know it's very strange.
I know, no, I'm not.
Yeah. I love the ordinary kind of family life that they had, and because I think that one of the things that I think is particularly sad about children, that when you're a child and there's alcohol abuse all around you, is that responsibility that's put on top of you, the responsibility of listening, say, particularly your mother. I would hear it from both of my parents, but with my mother in the house, giving out about my father all the time, and then in the car, he'd be giving out about her when he was fighting, and how there was a lack of any kind of stability within the family. But I would love to go to a house and to see the mother just listening to Gayborn on the radio and not giving out and doing her iron or making, all this kind of...
A normality that you perceive to be a normality, yes. You don't know what's going on.
You don't really know what's going on. But it did seem like a normality. And I was very friendly with this girl too when I was a teenager, whose father was a recovering alcoholic and a great man, did loads of great work. And I felt they understood me. I felt they didn't think there was something wrong with me or something wrong with the family.
Yes.
And it was somewhere that I could just show up and they,
So you mentioned therapy as in leading to the book. So what were you saying? Well, I don't want you to go in obviously because that's therapy, but what were you saying about blame? Did you blame your parents for how? No.
My mother blamed me. I was blamed. I got a lot of blame, like no wonder I drink and what did you do? My mother was in PATS a few times. My father was never getting dried out, of course, and he would just think it was ridiculous that anyone would think he had a problem with drink, really, until he got older. And then he acknowledged it, but he decided it was too late. But my mother was in St. Pat's and St. Infant's, and she was in getting dried out all the time, a lot of times. And she came home, and I remember I had come out of hospital. I was in hospital for 3 months. When I was a teenager with viral pneumonia, and I came out of hospital and she was drinking again, and I told her. So she felt, if I would have stopped myself, she'd say,
And what about those times when she was off, and then, that I suppose there's a fear constantly that she's going to go back on, and then the realization maybe that she has.
She did. I mean, I was always afraid of my mother, even when we were estranged. I didn't see my mother for 20 years before she died, until 2 days before she died, when she sent for me. She was in hospital and she sent for me. But when she left the family home, and I didn't really have anything to do with her, and then my husband kind of sort of said, I think we had, our second baby was born, and he said, you know, he had bumped into her and she was working around the corner from him, and he said, you know, maybe you should see her and let her see the baby, and I did. And she was off the drink, but I was still always afraid of her, and always afraid she'd go back. But she would go away on holidays, say, and she would take my children on holidays, but she'd drink on the holidays, and I'd know she was going to do it. I wouldn't tell my husband, but I'd know, and I would be terrified, and I wouldn't sleep. But I was afraid to say to her, you know, it took me
even as an adult, with your children,
with my children, who, you know, are, you know, I just mollycoddled them the whole time. I was terrified in every other aspect, but I was so afraid of her. But you know, she broke out loads of times when she, even when she was sober, you know.
We're going to talk generally, I think, about society and its role, and I'm going to bring Marion in now. Marion, your dad was an alcoholic. Nicky Rackard, people know the name. There's even a cup named after him. There's a statue of him down in Wexford, and he was a bit of a trailblazer because he was high profile. And yet he wrote about his alcoholism in a national newspaper.
Yeah.
That was in the 70s.
Yeah.
That was big, wasn't it?
It was. And I remember I was in London as a student working, and my mum rang, let's say Saturday night, saying, oh, you know, will you go to so-and-so's house because they'll have a newspaper there and your dad's story will be in it. So I read this story, and honestly it was like reading Double Dutch. It made I thought I was reading about Jack Sprat. I honestly, none of it kind of...
Well, you didn't recognise your own father's story?
No, I didn't. I suppose there was a lot of scoring and goals and hurling stuff in the conversation. But, and you know, it was 4 consecutive weeks of a long story. So I didn't read each week.
Yes, yes.
But it's only now, in fact, you know, it's only now that I go back and read it and see... You know, I read a bit of it in the last few days, and you know, he was talking about blackouts, and he said anyone who gets blackouts should realise they have a problem with alcohol. You know, he began to get a lot of insight. He went to John of God's. He had been in and out. He'd been in various institutions and drying out, and you know, but there was no therapy then. You know, there was no therapy back in that time, but what happened there was that he was introduced to AA, and as a result of being in AA, he really took on the program, the 12 Steps program. And I suppose because he really was in the very chronic stage. I mean, he started drinking. He was drinking before 1953. They won the medal in 55 and 56. And he wasn't drinking all that period, so that was the great success. But then it came to 57, and he went to New York with the All-Stars, and you know, he had retired at that stage, so he drank then.
From then until the 70s.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think he gave up the drink when you were 15, did he? He'd been off the drink a while, had he?
He did. I mean, again, this is the tragedy of it, is that, you know, things have to escalate and escalate and escalate to a terrible rupture, I call it. There's no word that conveys it more than that. A rupture in our family situation, which meant we couldn't continue to live together. So we were scattered. It was chronic addiction, and it was, you know, a whole plethora of things. You know, there's a word that I've come across recently, the increasing vulnerability of the situation. You know, there's constant problems, and they're piling up and piling up.
But you see, you have years and years of psychotherapy, counselling, working in the organisation here, setting up Silent Voices. So the language you use now is not the language you would have used then, obviously.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm interested in how you would have described it at the time.
I can honestly say I wouldn't have had a description, because I was literally imploding inside.
Okay.
I had no words.
You did that.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking at the words that came up in the video we showed there, and fear and anxiety came up over and over again.
Totally.
As a child, like, can you remember what's your first living memory of knowing that there's something not right here? Was there?
I suppose, you know, I would always have gauged the situation by how my mother was. I would have really absorbed her look. I would have absorbed her emotions. In fact, I lived through her because I was so worried and anxious when I'd look at her and see she was tired or tense or, you know, with the problems that were presenting. But then she would try and comfort me, and we became allies. We became, in fact, too close probably for mother and daughter, you know, because I was comforting her, I'm sure, and that's known as parentification, where you become the parent of your parent, you know, in some ways.
And yet that happened to you as well, then you were,
yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and that means that you're missing out on the normal run of things, being a child, and carefree, and adolescence, all the things you should be doing. You shouldn't be worrying about your mother.
Absolutely.
Or fearful of your father.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that comes through in terms of play. I often think back, I
Did
don't
you?
think
Yes,
I played,
right, yeah.
you know.
And that's so important. Playing is so important.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I remember my brother and sister played with each other, but I never remember playing much with them.
And were you older?
I was the eldest.
Ah, you see, there you go.
The responsible one. But
yeah.
I often escaped down to my very best friend downtown. And boy, did I enjoy myself in that family, you know.
Yes.
I just loved being in their company. They made me laugh. I'm not saying my dear family didn't make me laugh, you know, because it's so important to hold the depth of the love, you know, that you have for this family who are in pain, but nobody can do anything about it, even though.
But you can't do that when you're a kid. Do you know what I mean? Like that's you again looking back on it and knowing what you know.
That's true.
You know.
Yeah.
But like you know, like you like hate this person, despise this person.
Yeah.
You know, and no understanding of why they might be addicted to alcohol.
That's right.
You don't have that understanding. You're putting a sort of an adult psychotherapist lens on something.
I can't get out.
Yeah, I know. I completely understand that.
Yeah.
And was the fact that your dad was so well known, like one of the greatest hurlers of all time, and did you have any sense of that he was this hero?
Yeah, it was both an incredible, what would you say, secret you were holding because he was loved and adored, and we had the only name in Ireland with that name that was associated.
Oh, yeah.
So no matter where we went, they'd be all over you like
yes.
flies, you know, because
your dad's amazing.
They'd tell you what goal he scored and when he scored, and then we were seeing these wonderful photos of him back then, you know, because we didn't remember him playing. And his two brothers with him. And, I mean, they were wonderful and so on, but, you know, it was just a magical world for adults.
And Christine was mentioning there about, you know, don't tell them anything. And in your case, I suppose that was extra important because
absolutely
this guy who was adored, hero worship, and you knew this horrible dark side.
I did, and yet, you know, this is the other thing. I would, you know, travel with him in the car out to the country, and, you know, there would be, you would always, in his sober time, you'd sense a very sensitive, you know.
He was a vet.
And he loved animals and so on, and like he talked to horses in the softest, gentlest way, you know, and he was mad into them, But it was just what drink did to him, and what was really the most difficult, and I'll never forget the intense hatred almost that I had for the crowd that would drink with him, that he would bring back to the house, and then they'd have a total you-know-what, and the next thing you'd be hearing Nat King Cole or South Pacific or something on the turnpike, and that's when the chaos.
We're going to talk to Stephen in a moment, and like the three of you are adults of alcoholics, adult children of alcoholics, and you have all the words because that's what you've done. But like, this is a very difficult question to answer, and you know, it's how do you think it has shaped you as an adult? You know, and if you can be as honest as you can.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's given me the greatest gift I could have been given, which is the career I've had, with a wonderful organisation that enabled me and facilitated me to undertake various roles, to meet wonderful colleagues, to, you know, solve the mystery as far as I can of this huge problem, you know, that is affecting our nation in ways that we had known nothing about. And I know Francis will talk about that later as well. But as regards myself, I mean, I struggled all of the time to feel, you know, to fit in, you know, I often felt like an outsider, a sense of inadequacy. You know, I think I took on so much responsibility and anxiety as a child that I didn't sort of maybe go through the kind of tough other toughness, you know, the kind of things that give you great resilience or whatever. That I remember, you know, swimming came to our village, you know, swimming pool was built in locally, and I remember just not wanting to enter the competitions because I mightn't be able to finish it, or, you know, so I had terrible self-limiting thoughts about myself, you know, and I struggled with intimacy, absolutely. And, you know, even though I had wonderful friends and so on, but never necessarily feeling I totally belonged. And I think, you know, subsequently in my work as a psychotherapist and addiction counsellor, you know, we used to hear the phrase, the hole in the soul, kind of, you know, who's going to fill the hole in the soul? And for many it was alcohol that filled it. But I remember at 17 going to France, you know, and I was very grateful to have so many protective factors when I was a child, like boarding school. I think it was a huge
And your mother, obviously,
and
you
my
know, because
wonderful mother,
you
yeah.
both your parents were abused alcohol. Yeah, at least you had one.
Exactly.
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
But I suppose overall, you know, what is
And
your...
boarding school took you away out of the family home. Is that you went to boarding school as well? Did
I
you?
did, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
You went as well.
But I remember going to France when I was 17 for an exchange, and my mother begging me not to drink alcohol, you know, because she said there's a vulnerability in the family, and just trying not to do that. Like, those kind of minding of us was just so good, because it gave us that, each of us, that sense of, you know, don't go down that road, similar road to your dad, you know. So I would think there's lots of other things, but I have to say, I know so well that my greatest vulnerability is also my greatest strength. And I think that that's what I've worked on over the years. And I'm really proud of, you know, the work that I've been privileged to be able to engage with Francis and other colleagues, you know. So honestly, there's so much more to be said. And I think the wonderful thing is that each person, you know, has a particular story.
Yes, yeah.
Truly interesting.
Yeah. So for Christine and Marion, just give them a round of applause, just to give them, we move across to Stephen. Stephen's Public Affairs Manager with Channel 4. So I mentioned your story in one sentence when I was introducing you there, that you're brought up in London of Irish parents. Your dad's an alcoholic.
Yes.
That okay?
That's all accurate.
Yeah, and we'll get to Nicole as well in a moment. But just having listened to Christine and Marion, and give us a sense of your childhood then.
So, lots of what has been said really resonates with me, by the way. It's been very eloquently articulated. But in terms of my story, I think it was always clear to us, myself and my brother and my mum, that my dad was an accomplished pint drinker in the first instance. He was one of them people who could, you know, drink lots and then get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and do a hard day's work without batting an eyelid. And, you know, George Best was somebody who he liked to mention a lot, you know, lamenting what he could have gone on to achieve if the drink hadn't got him. So I think what happened to my dad was, over time, the drink did catch up with him.
And your dad, both your parents were from Northern Ireland?
They're from Tyrone, both of them from Tyrone.
And both sides of the divide?
Both sides of the divide. So my mum was a Protestant, my dad's Catholic. They came over to London in the 80s and married each other. They won't mind me saying there was some, eyebrows raised at the time, understandable with what was going on. But they were able to build, they were able to work hard, and they sent me and my brother Daniel to university. But yes, there were absolutely plenty of incidents, and there were big, profound impacts on me, I think.
So was there violence or no?
Occasionally, yeah, there was.
Right, okay.
Yeah, there was occasionally.
Yeah.
Lots of anger.
Yeah.
Lots of shouting. Lots of kind of temper tantrums almost from my dad. One of the big things I think about it was the uncertainty. Knowing that or suspecting that my dad would be in the pub, not really knowing when he would get back home and what state he would be in, and how big would the row be, and maybe subconsciously I was wondering who's going to have the upper hand between my dad and my mum, and hopefully it doesn't get physical. Most of the time it wasn't, thankfully. Occasionally, sometimes it was.
But that sort of uncertainty, as you call it, that creates stress, anxiety.
Yeah. It's chaotic looking back at it now, with the benefit of hindsight and reading into some of these things. I can use words like that. It was chaotic. There was lots of anxiety in the household. I felt like I was walking on eggshells a lot of the time, and being very sensitive to all of my family's facial expressions and body language, and I think I learned myself to be a bit of a clown almost, comedian, telling jokes and.
What, to raise the mood?
Raise the mood. I think I can be a people pleaser in that regard. I want to crack jokes with people. I want to break the ice. I want to have a good impression on people.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I learned that behaviour, and also what I shared with Marion as well. Really, really put pressure on myself to achieve lots of things, even at the expense of my health sometimes, burning myself out at work, and feeling inadequate, basically, never feeling good enough, feeling the big kind of chasm inside, to be blunt about it.
And that doesn't make logical sense, of course, doesn't that? Because that's all subconscious, is it, Marion? Like that thing to be superhuman when you're coming out of a damaged sort of environment.
Yeah.
It's messed up. Of course, it's being human is messed up, really.
You're compensating, you see. You're just striving, wanting to succeed, because you'll get the praise and you'll get recognition and you'll be seen.
Yeah.
And
another word that came up in the video was hypersensitivity, and you mentioned that to me today on the phone.
Yes. Yeah, that's still a thing as well. That's one thing I think that stays with me. But particularly, I feel particularly sensitive with my dad. Sometimes he could just give me a look. It's just a look sometimes. Doesn't even need to raise his voice. It's just a pulling of the face. Oh, you didn't win your rugby match today.
Right.
Oh, you got a B or a C. That's that kind of thing. This is all me telling myself a story.
Yes.
I'm projecting my own interpretation of it, but I find it interesting that I'm just sensitive.
How did you feel about going public on this? Because you're an ambassador for NACOA, which is the National Association for Children of Alcoholics, and that's when you decide to be an ambassador. It means that you're going to have to tell your story a number of times.
Yes.
And another word that came up was shame, and keeping things a secret. So you're fighting against that.
Yeah, shame is a big thing. I think there's a couple of elements to that for me. I think there's a shame I feel about maybe airing family business in public, or certainly outside the family. That's one thing. The second thing is feeling that I would be judged for it, feeling our family's dysfunctional, our family's defective. You mentioned intimacy, Marion, it's that kind of thing as well. Been struggling to relate to people either at work or, you know, have long-term relationships with people. There's a real shame, I feel, around that aspect too.
The shame around that, of course, and this is the thing, and you might know the six C's of.
Yes.
Go on. What are they, Nicole?
I've got them written down. I can't cure it. I can't control it. I can care for myself. I can communicate.
That's 4. 4 out of 6 ain't bad.
I didn't cause it.
Yes.
Thank you. Cure, cause.
Cure, cause.
Control. Celebrate, is that the other?
No, sorry.
Yeah.
It's in my notes.
Is it? Yeah. But I think that's the thing, but again, it's like that the child's mind that it doesn't make any sense, but they feel that in some way they're the cause of this. And it happens when people separate as well, that children can feel that they separated because of them.
Yeah.
So was there a sense that you might in some way be contributing to your dad's drinking?
Yeah, I think subconsciously, yeah, I did think that. I felt frustrated about it. I felt frustrated trying to have that type of conversation with him, trying to get through to him. And I've spoken to some of his close friends as well, and they had similar conversations with him. It never really registered to him that he was an alcoholic because he was getting up and going to work. Because, you know, for the longest period anyway, he was not getting kind of stopped for drink driving or any of these kind of things, so it wasn't an issue. And I think with that aspect, I think that's partly, he actually doesn't drink anymore.
Right.
This is something I want to say in this setting, that he had a bit of an episode a few years ago, and I just felt like enough is enough here. I just had kind of reached that point. And so what I did, I was where my parents were living in northwest London, and I knew what pub he was in. We somehow knew that, and I just, you know, walked down to the pub, pretty much physically dragged them out. Said, "Come on, we're going home," and, you know, walked him home. I said, "You're going to lie down. I'm going to give you some coffee. You're going to sober up. We're going to chat as a family about this. You know, something has to change here." So my mum was home, and, you know, I briefed her on that. My brother Daniel, he lives in Barcelona, so I rang him on the phone and I dialed him into the conversation. And for those of you who watch The Sopranos or something, it's a bit like that intervention with Chris Moltisanti, but it wasn't as embarrassing as that. It didn't kind of end that badly. But that's kind of where I got the idea.
What age were you?
This was only a few years ago.
All right,
so I was 28, 29.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was relatively late.
So unlike the two, Christine and Marion, you were an adult. So
I was an adult, yeah.
And as an adult, and I'll put this to all of you, but do you understand? Can you understand maybe why your dad drank? Have you any idea why he drank?
I don't know for a fact why, but I can absolutely, and it's only recently I think I'm starting to accept it more and more. I can absolutely see why he would kind of fall into that. You know, he moved over to London like lots of Irish people in the 70s and 80s, and he's from a big family, and he had no family in London. And I suppose, you know, people come and work in construction, they work long hours, they're probably living in kind of flats and bedsits, and there wouldn't be that much community other than in the pub. Like in London and other cities, the Irish community, there was kind of social scene, the network was all built around the Irish Centre or the pub.
Yeah.
And so that's where people went in the evening. They went for a few pints after work most days, so that's easy to fall into.
Yeah, it's the scourge, isn't it, of Ireland? And we haven't mentioned our national relationship with drink, really. It's all been very specific and individual, but it's all against the backdrop of that, isn't it?
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know,
it's not. I don't think it's changing anytime soon. We'll get to that when we get to the general discussion. But thanks very much, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. Francis Black, thanks for waiting so patiently there. And it's interesting that Stephen ended up talking about family and a family intervention, because the Rise Foundation was set up because you saw a need.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, you know, as I'm listening, it's really, you know, I really believe I was meant to be here tonight to hear, you know, Marianne's story, Christine Dwyer Hickey's story, because I can identify. And it's like, have I been living in denial for like all my life here, you know?
What did
you know,
your own childhood?
Family, you know,
right.
your own family life, but like I mean, I wouldn't have considered my father being an alcoholic, if you know what I mean. But he would have been a pints man. He would have gone to the pub every night.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I do think I'm in denial here, but
yes.
he went to the pub every night. He was a lovely man. He was the most beautiful man. He came from Whelan Island, very gentle, soft-spoken, lovely man. But he went to the pub. He didn't come home from work.
Yeah.
He went to the pub, and then he'd make sure he'd come home when all the kids were in bed.
But you,
and,
you have I suppose, unique to you, in the group. Like you were an alcoholic. You're in recovery.
A long time.
Yeah. So you have that's the experience that we haven't discussed. And did you ever connect that to your dad in any way, or no?
Never did.
No.
You know, I would. I mean, the anger that and I identified with you saying you were never afraid of your dad, but you were afraid of your mum. Mum, she was angry, like. And you wouldn't know when, but she never drank.
Right.
So there was a bit of confusion there.
Yeah.
She wasn't a drinker,
Yeah.
but she was angry with him. She was frustrated. She loved the bones of him, but he wasn't really available to her.
Or you?
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember much about my father. Don't remember him being around, but he wasn't available to her, and I know she loved him a lot.
Right.
And I think I think she managed all the not having the money piece and all of that, but I think she struggled with the fact that she didn't think he loved her because he was always up in the pub.
Okay.
So I think that was that. But I think from my perspective, with regard to, I mean, I would have, again, locked into the not being good enough, low self-esteem, never being able to live up to, do you know what I mean? And I think that was probably where I would have drank, and then I had a marriage breakup. I was on my own with 2 small kids. I mean, there was a whole plethora of things.
Yeah.
Do you know that when I turned to alcohol for comfort, and I would have been that, evening wine. In my head there was no problem with that when I could afford it. Actually, it wasn't even every night because I couldn't afford it every night. So do you know what I mean? But I knew. I suppose there was a problem for me when I, and I would have started drinking when the kids were in bed, but in the morning time.
So I'm just, because people talk about breaking the cycle, and that if you're a son or daughter of an alcoholic, I don't know what the percentage is, but you're a lot more likely to become an alcoholic yourself.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you were in recovery, you were counselling, and you saw a mother.
I was in the Rutland, working as a therapist in the Rutland Treatment Centre, and I'm sure people have heard this story many a time. And while I loved working with those who were trying to get into recovery from addiction, I started to work with families. And again, it's only kind of, registered now that I was need to leave mommy, you know what I mean? And there was a young woman who came in that I'll never forget her as long as I live. She was quite young, she was in her late 20s, and she had 2 small kids with her. She couldn't get her mind, and her partner was in for alcohol and gambling. And I think she was kind of able to handle the alcohol, but the gambling, he lost everything. So she was really and truly in a horrific place. She was terrified, she was frightened, she was grieving for her lovely partner. She wanted him to be the kid's daddy. She was angry, and she was just a roller coaster of emotions, and she wasn't present to her kids. And I think that really connected with me. And I was looking at these kids, she was gone. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She was so obsessed with him and the grief and the pain and the loss with him that she just wasn't present to herself, but she certainly wasn't present to her kids. So it was almost like she was addicted to him. That's the only way I can describe it to you. So her fuel was him. If he was going to be all right, I'm going to be all right. So she had a really unhealthy attachment to him that was really lethal going forward. And if she wasn't going to get into recovery herself, it was going to impact the kids long term. So in a way, I think that was for me the thing that made me decide this woman needs her own team of therapists, qualified therapists like they have in the Rutland. This woman needs a program. She needs a pathway to her own recovery, because she can actually break the cycle. It doesn't have to be him. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, of course.
She can actually break the cycle of addiction by stepping into her own recovery. And at that time, Stephen Rowan just...
It's interesting talking about recovery with somebody who isn't addicted.
Yeah.
You know, and you say she's addicted to him.
You see, the thing it is like, and you described it really well, it was like a third person. Addiction is like a really toxic, insidious, dark force that comes into the family. It's horrific. It comes into the family, and not only does it want to rob the person who's taken the substance of everything that's good, their dignity, their self-respect. They become, you know, and they're really lovely people. We all, like, we love them. Do you know what I mean? They're our family members. But it does this exact same to the whole family. The whole family, Marion said, the whole in the soul.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what it does. It creates this emptiness and void within the family members that really is important, that the family member gets an understanding of why recovery is important for them, because that can break the cycle.
And when you first approach people, or they approach you, and you say, this is what we want to do for you.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, go on.
So it depends on where the person is. Every single family member that comes through our door is in a different place, is in a different level of where they are. Some are in the place of, he has a problem, just tell me how to fix it.
I'll be gone, yeah, thanks. Yeah. Give me the kit. Yeah.
And then you'll have people who are on the verge of just, like, they call it a brownout. I think it's Stephanie Brown. One of the big professors, instead of calling it a blackout for somebody who's in addiction, it's like a brownout. It's burnt out, completely burnt out. Tried everything, have nowhere to, just don't know what else to do, and are ready to take on board what recovery is.
Yeah.
You know, so by the time they come to Rise, they're ready to really get an understanding of it. But if somebody who's coming in that early stage of, look, I think he has a problem, or I think she has a problem, I just want to know, you know, and particularly mammies or daddies, parents, just want to know, tell me how to fix my child, because I just want to get this sorted, and I just want to go back to normal. I want my child back. It's huge grief when it comes to being a parent of an adult child, you know. So it's so different for each individual, and the therapists that we have are very skilled in knowing where that family member is in that piece of recovery.
Yeah. You're you know, a senator, so we haven't talked about, you know, our attitude as a nation to alcohol, which is completely fucked up. Yeah. And like, and I say this, I'm bored listening to myself, but like, there was a report released over 10 years ago. It was authored by Tony Whelan, and there were a number of recommendations in that, like pretty straightforward things like separating alcohol sponsorship from sport, not having any drinks advertised before 9 o'clock, all very straightforward things.
Very simple measures.
Yeah. 10 years on, and none of it has happened. Yeah.
And it was passed, and you know, I mean, we ended up getting it passed. I mean,
Why? But why? Can you explain why that's the case?
We had a big battle. I think the industry is very powerful. I think the alcohol industry is extremely powerful, and I think they have a lot of say, and they have the ear of a lot of politicians. In my experience, because I went into Leinster House in 2016, and if you like the actual bill, the alcohol bill is actually a Fine Gael bill. So it came in to the Seanad, and I genuinely thought, because it's a Fine Gael bill, who were in power at the time,
it'd be passed.
It's just going to fly through. I could not believe the amount of senators who were totally opposed to the bill, to the 4 simple measures, and I'm talking simple measures.
So it was a minimum pricing?
Minimum unit pricing, it was in the shops, structural separation, advertising, and then there was the advertising in their schools. Wasn't that one of them?
Yes.
There was 4 very simple measures, and
so the minimum unit pricing has happened, and the separation has happened.
The separation's happened, and we have to look at the other. I think they're working on the others, but it's very slow.
And then also you need labelling as well, don't you?
Yeah, the labelling, and we actually got a cancer warning on I won that amendment where we got a cancer warning on the actual labels.
Do they appear? Does
I
it?
haven't seen it yet.
No,
They're
still not there. Still not there.
But
No.
we did get that on the bill. But what I was amazed at was, you know, when I was very naive going into Leinster House. You know, I was never involved in politics before. But I couldn't believe the amount of lobbying. At one point you'd see like 6 or 7 of people from the industry, from the alcohol industry, around one, you know, TD or senator. So they were very powerful, and when you look at the lobbying register, you can see how many hundreds of times, thousands of times they'd been in that year. You know, and then you're working with Alcohol Action. I was working with Alcohol Action and really trying to focus, who did phenomenal work on it. To try and I had to go around then and get Sinn Féin, Fianna Gael members, Fianna Fáil members to really get behind this. We got it passed in the end, and only because I work in the field of addiction and because they knew that I had no other agenda. I didn't have a political agenda, that I had a genuine care about the impact on people, that I think I got heard. And I think that's what kind of made, and of course Alcohol Action played a huge role in all of that as well. So like...
it's very frustrating, isn't it?
But we got it passed, and look, there's still more work to be done, but we did get it passed as best as we could. And you know, at the end, I suppose we were happy to get it passed, and I do think they will, but it's very slow. I do think it's very, very slow.
Well, what do you, because you've worked in this area for years as well, and you worked in the HSE, so you're sort of on the inside in a way. Well, how do you feel? Why has nothing changed?
I think, you know, just thinking
But just before you, because tell them about 1976 and the Late Late Show.
Oh yeah.
Just briefly, because because that's so long ago.
Yeah. There was an entire programme on alcoholism in 1976 with Gay Byrne in November 1976. Right. And I remember 2 weeks after my father died, my photo was on the front of the Sunday Independent saying, "Nicky's daughter carries on father's crusade," because, you know, my father had been working very hard for years trying to get, you know, 12-stepping people and so on. So when he died prematurely, that's, you know, I was then invited to give a talk from the child's perspective. But when it came to the Late Late, it was actually the programme that introduced the Rutland Centre, that very programme. Father Rayfield Short was introduced to the nation, and the film I'll Quit Tomorrow was shown. But Gay Byrne came to me in the front row, as you do, and he said, "Who do you blame for your father's drinking?" And I just said, "Irish culture." And I knew it in my heart and soul, and I still know it, that there's a normalisation of alcohol behaviours, you know, the tolerance of excessive drinking, the tolerance of drunkenness. I was just looking at some notes today, and that, you know, even non-dependent drinkers affect their children when they get tipsy or drunk, because a child doesn't distinguish between a parent who's tipsy or drunk. They're changed behaviour.
Isn't it odd though, because there is that, and we know that it's in fact there is this tolerance, and yet there's a shame around excessive drinking. There's a mismatch there in some ways, is there?
You know, there's a I suppose, you know, people don't know what's the difference between heavy drinking and you know, addictive drinking or dependency.
Because I mentioned before you came out there, where is it at now? Like, because in some of the stuff I read, they say that the term alcoholic is sort of, they're not using that in America anymore, are they?
No, they're not. Well, they still are with residential centres and treatment centres, but the DSM, which is the Bible of definitions, calls it an alcohol use disorder. And there are 11 questions, and depending on how many questions you answer within the 11, you're either mild, moderate, or severe alcohol use disorder.
Right.
So any of those questions, you know, is a problem. And the simplest definition always has been, if your drinking is causing problems in any area of your life, then it is a problem.
Yeah.
So,
do you think, and I'm going to open up the floor, do you think that having a sort of a black and white binary thing of you're an alcoholic, you're not an alcoholic, lets a lot of people off the hook.
Of course.
Yeah.
And
lets even the whole society off the hook. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when, you know, we were trained as addiction counsellors, it was all about the disease.
Yeah.
And I knew in my heart and soul, because my first job was going around to schools giving talks to kids. Imagine telling them you'll get a disease if you drink your first drink.
Yeah.
You know, it just didn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I used to say simply, if you drink too much, too often, for too long, you're likely to develop a problem with it.
Yeah.
But again, you know, that differs from men and women, you know. And I'm looking forward to the day where we begin to discuss the gender issues in addiction. And, you know, an ISPCC study from the UK showed that for every one boy that rings up the childline, the helpline, 3.5 girls ring it up. Do you know? So all of those kind of things are terribly important as well.
What that they've been abused, is it?
Not
as kids,
just
no.
abused, no, they're concerned. They're concerned.
ISPCC in their house.
In
right.
their house,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Okay. Just before we go, can I say thanks to Sheila for inviting me. Thanks very much to Stephen for coming back from Sierra Leone to be with us. Marion for setting up everything. Thanks very much to Christine, and we can recommend Tatty, the book, which we now know is autobiographical. And Francis, and continue to do the brilliant work you're doing, the Rise Foundation. Thanks so much for being with us. Thanks, Francis. And thank you so much for being such an attentive audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Thank you very much, Ray.
Thank you.